This is The Camp with Zach Heilprin and the Athletics' Jesse Temple.
Yes, welcome into The Camp. I'm Zach Heilprin. That's the Athletics' Jesse Temple. Badgers are 2-1. They bounced back with a 35-14 win over Georgia Southern. It wasn't pretty. They got down 14-7, then they rolled off 28 straight points. A lot of tweets that were almost sent at 14-7 were not sent, at least from this guy. I'm kind of glad I didn't. Some people did not hold back on those tweets, and they were, I don't know if they were forced to eat it at all, but because I don't think anything that happened the rest of the game really takes away from some of the struggles in the first half. We've seen these 3 straight games where you've had these slow starts and where they come alive in the third quarter. And we'll talk about that. Going to talk also about Braelon Allen and his big week, his tough week. He called it a tough week, both, physically and probably mentally for him, as he was dealing with getting dinged up a little bit and dealing with the issue with carries the previous week. So we'll get to that as well. And then, holy crap, the defense caused a turnover. Actually caused 6 of them. And they are now on the plus side of the turnover margin somehow after being 130th in the FBS last year. Davis Brin, give you a nice round of applause for your efforts in helping that happen, because they some of those were really, really good plays by Wisconsin. Some of them were just thrown to them, and they caught them. So that's I guess a pat on the back for Wisconsin as well. But let's start with what has not gone well for Wisconsin to this point, and it is the start to games. It has not been very good. They got off to a horrible start again, team-wise, against Georgia Southern. We saw it cost them against Washington State. They had way too much ground to make up. They started slow against Buffalo. They were only up, 14-10 at halftime, down 24-9 at halftime against Washington State, tied 7-7 against Georgia Southern. It has become the talking point here, Jesse. Those starts have been horrible, and then they've been Big Ten caliber champion-level offense and defense in the third quarter.
I wrote about this in The Athletic for Monday, and yeah, they've been one of the best second half teams in the country. Unfortunately for the Badgers, they have been one of the worst first half teams in the country. It is remarkable. It is a true Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde situation. And I thought it was, Luke Fickell said a lot of worthwhile things after the game, but the very first thing he said was he was just joking with us, saying we did our best to make it interesting so you guys can thank me later, but obviously that wasn't a part of the plan. It's really sort of inexplicable why this has now been 3 consecutive games where they have had poor starts, because you see that third quarter they've outscored teams 48-7, and the players want to tell you that is the team they believe they can be. On the other hand, there's that notion of consistently inconsistent, and they're showing who they are in the first half right now. And you're right, they can get away with it against Buffalo. They can get away with it against Georgia Southern. They can be down by a touchdown 3 minutes into the third quarter and rattle off 4 consecutive touchdowns. But we saw what happened against Washington State. If this continues, we'll see what happens against some other quality Big Ten teams. But, one of the things that Tanner Bortolini mentioned to me after the game was that he was listening. I don't know if it was on the headset, but the coaches were talking at halftime about it was just one guy each play. It was, the tight ends did something here. The running back did something here. The offensive lineman did something here. And we know that that's all it takes to ruin a play. Think about the illegal formation where they've got a first down on fourth down. Chez Mellusi runs it up the gut, but there's an illegal formation, and now you got a punt. It just, all those things tend to add up. I don't know what to make of all this. And the thing is, neither do the players and really Luke Fickell, because they all say, if I had the answer, I would fix it right now. So they've got to figure out a way, though, to start faster, because what we saw against Georgia Southern is not going to cut it.
It's not going to cut it as you enter Big Ten play. It cost them against Washington State. They were in such a hole against Washington State that it didn't matter how good they played in the third quarter, because the hole was too big to get out of, even though they had their opportunities there in the fourth quarter. The ball down 2, opportunity to go and take the lead and couldn't get it done. I get that, but putting yourself in that position to have to come back and, be perfect in the second half is just way too tough against really good competition. And again, some people will sit here and say Purdue's not very good competition. That's probably true, but they're also a Big Ten team, and Georgia Southern is not. And it took a really impressive third quarter from Wisconsin and some just boneheaded plays from Davis Brin to get them back into that to get them rolling in that game. So going to Purdue on Friday night, a night game, the first somewhat night game at Purdue. They're going to call, they called last week a night game at Washington State, even though the game kicked off at 4:30. They did not call the game in 2004 down in Purdue, a night game that ended obviously deep into the night when it started this 16-game stretch. But they're going into a night game at Purdue, the first night game at Purdue since that game in 2004. And it's going to be a huge, huge challenge if you're not hitting and not going straight from the opening whistle, from the opening kickoff, and figuring it out and not putting yourself behind the 8-ball in the second half, because you just can't consistently do that and consistently win games in conference play. I don't believe they can. Now, watch, they'll come out and do it on Friday night, and that'd be fine. That'd be fine. I'm saying you can't do it consistently. You cannot do that consistently and be a great team. You can't put yourself down multiple scores going into the second half and expect to come back, especially on the road. They weren't able to do it at Washington State. I think it'd be very, very tough to do it at Purdue. We'll get to the Purdue game. That's obviously down here coming up on Friday. We'll talk about that game during Wednesday's show. But on Saturday against Georgia Southern, they needed a little bit of a kick in the butt. And I think a lot of people will sit here and say, and maybe fans will sit here and think, what happened at halftime? Like significant adjustments, right? All these changes, or a kick in the butt, a little, getting chewed out by the head coach. And I asked Jake Chaney if that was the case, because I asked Jake Chaney about it last week. What was the locker room like at halftime? And I asked him this week, what was it like? Was there some, getting after your butts? And he said, no. Here he is.
Vic has yet to chew us out. Vic has yet to have a mother F speech where it's just like, okay, we gotta wake up. But it's more of accountability. You got Tanner walking around, hey, my bad. But Braelon's like, we're gonna pick it up. Defense, talking to each other, communicating. And when you have a team that does that, you don't need the rah-rah speech, because there's some times where rah-rah speeches aren't needed. Sometimes rah-rah speeches are looked at, frowned upon. You don't really want that. So I think we just picked it up as a team, just stick together as a team, and we made it out.
You were there too, Jesse, for his comments. That doesn't surprise me at all, but why do you think they've been better in the third quarter? Because when they came out, they scored 28 unanswered in the second half, 3 of those in the third quarter, and Braelon Allen was a huge part of it, and we'll talk about that. But can you just hypothesize why you think they are better in the third quarter than they are in the first half?
The simple answer is execution. I mean, people may not want to hear that, but and this is some numbers that are in my story, but they had 7 drives in the first half. They punted 5 times. 4 of those drives ended in 3 and outs. And the ones that went 3 and out, Wisconsin had -4 yards. It's just inexplicable with how explosive, at least on paper, you think this offense should be. And, Luke Fickell talked about this idea of it felt like there was a little bit different fire once they went onto the field down 14-7. And it took getting some, but that's ridiculous. I mean, that may be true. And I certainly am not disputing what the head coach is saying, since he's around his guys all the time. But like Jake Chaney said in another answer, there's no way we should be tied at halftime with that team. And sure, Georgia Southern beat a bad Nebraska team last year, but I think we at least believe this Wisconsin team is a notch or 2 above where Nebraska was last year. So it's inexplicable. And I think that's it. I think it really, there seems to be something about mentally locking in and executing, because if Bortolini is talking about how here's a mistake from this guy in this position group, and here's a mistake from this guy in this position group, why is that happening early and not happening later? That's all it comes down to. I mean, you can look at this multiple ways, Zach, and I know that Fickell mentioned this too, and players as well. They spent all offseason talking about this idea of finishing, and maybe that comes into play here. On the other hand, they had a chance to finish against Washington State and couldn't close the deal, but you've got to do something differently to start. And I mean, I mentioned this before about how bad they've been in the first half. I want to throw out some of these advanced stats, which is in the story from True Media. So Wisconsin is 110th nationally in first half scoring average, 10 points a game. They're 10th nationally in second half scoring average, 21.7 points per game. There's a lot of similar numbers like that, but they're essentially top 10 or top 15 in every offensive statistical category in the second half, and one of the 20 worst teams in the country in the first half. It's bizarre.
It's not ideal. It's not ideal. You mentioned some of the numbers in the third quarter. Just some of the raw numbers yesterday were eye-opening. I mean, they had 10 of their 22 first downs came in the third quarter. They had 124 of their 207 yards rushing there in the third quarter. 187 of the 400 and some odd yards they put up for the day came in the quarter. It was one of those days or it's one of those games, and we've seen a lot of it now, where they just come out, and it wasn't hair on fire either, because they obviously had that huge blunder lining up illegally in the punt that you mentioned earlier, or not the punt, but the 4th and 1 deep in their own territory, trying to light a fire under his team, and they go for it and they get it, and they obviously the illegal formation, and then 3 plays later it's a touchdown and Georgia Southern's up. I had a question in Twitter that I got that I didn't actually not going to actually use for our Twitter questions, but I was wondering what you think about it. They asked whether the late hit on Chimere Dike may have lit a fire under them on the ensuing kickoff. He gets drilled out of bounds. Jack Bicknell, I think, takes the worst of it. But do you think that may have lit a bit of a fire, or was it what happened right after, which was a 6-yard run for Braelon Allen and then a 32-yard run for Braelon Allen, and he obviously finished it off with a touchdown. I'm wondering, do you think it had anything to do with the late hit, or more so what you got from Braelon?
I honestly don't. They got a little bit better field position, but we didn't mention this either. How many games do you think exist in college football where a team had +3 in the turnover advantage, and the offense came up with 0 points out of that and was tied at halftime?
Well, I suspect it's happened quite a bit, but in a game like that against that team, no.
Yeah. So I'd like to say it was just better field position, but my point is they had good field position in the first half and couldn't take advantage. Yeah, I do think it is Braelon. And I mean, he is another major story here, not just in this game, but in the early season. You look at what he had done to that point, had barely contributed at all. I think he had 4 carries for, I can't remember, 16 yards and 2 catches for 5 yards at that point. I know I wrote about it off the game, but has that 6-yarder up the middle, and then he gets good blocking around the right side, breaks a big run, and it just energized the team. It's what they've desperately needed. And obviously he had a touchdown run to tie the game at 14. And it just, the players talked about it afterward, the way they could feel something shift when Braelon did that. And it led to multiple other good drives. I mean, he had another drive where he got the other touchdown. He had runs of 15 and 8 yards. And Fickle talked about this too. You can't get much energy when you have a 2-yard run, even if you may be wearing down a defense, but you get those 6 to 8 yard runs and something starts to pop, and it just changes the course of the game. So I think it came down to what Braelon did, and very interesting week for him.
It is. Let's get into that, because I think, he gets dinged up in practice. He wasn't healthy already. He mentioned that, going to the Washington State game, nothing that was going to keep him out of the Washington State game, but he was dinged up off of some of the hits that happened in the Buffalo game, which again is just the story of Braelon's career. That's not a knock on him. It's not his fault. It's just the way that things are, is he takes a lot of low shots on his legs, because that's the way that you have to tackle a guy. So either way, he's dinged up already, and then he gets dinged up in practice further, and he wouldn't elaborate on what he's exactly dealing with, which I don't think anyone was expecting him to when they asked the question. But he's also dealing with the idea that he went to Luke Fickell and said, I want to be more involved. I want the ball in certain situations when it's a close game. I feel like I'm one of the best players, not just on this team, but in the country. And if I'm going to have that label, then I need to be involved, even though the 13 touches he got against Washington State were not good enough to give him more, in my opinion. I know 7 carries is not a lot. I get that. But that is set aside, he had that going for him too. And then he gets 5 touches in the first half, 4 carries, and he has to be thinking like, did everything fall in deaf ears here? And then the second half happened and it opened up.
Well, there's so many layers here because, first of all, and I think we've addressed this in the past week, but there's a delicate balance that Fickle and the coaching staff are trying to strike here, where you've got a player say, I want the ball more, and look at what I put on film the first year. Is it 2,500 plus rushing yards, 23 rushing touchdowns coming into this season, believing you're one of the best running backs in the country. On the other hand, in the touches that you did get, you weren't effective enough for us to continue to utilize you in that way. And by the way, we've also got Chez Mellusi. But there is the injury aspect to this too, and I think that has to play a role in how he's been utilized, and beyond that, what he's been able to do when he gets the ball. We've seen him at his best when he's explosive and powerful, and he certainly has some of that. We saw that on the 32-yard run, but I think there was a touch early in the game where you kind of saw him, it looked a little tentative, maybe wasn't necessarily able to shake somebody because he is dealing with something. And he talked about one of the things that he came to the coaches with on Sunday, and this is what he mentioned after the game, after the Georgia Southern game. He asked them a question and he wanted to know, do you have 100% faith in me, even if I'm not at 100%? And they said, like, that's not a question. We believe in you. And I followed up with him because I wasn't sure whether he was referencing the Georgia State game. It sounded like it would have been the Washington State game. And that's when he acknowledged that he had suffered an injury of some sort, not enough to keep him out against Washington State, but an injury against Buffalo. And so I do think that has to be considered in all of this. I mean, obviously he was on the field and he made some really quality plays in the second half, but he's dealing with something that is preventing him from being the best version of himself. And I think that's also why Chez Mellusi said that he didn't find out he was going to be the starter until Friday. So that's noteworthy here too.
It is. And Braelon actually said he didn't know if he was going to be ready to go and actually play in the game until he got on the field for a few snaps.
Yes.
And then he ended up in the injury tent and everyone's like, oh, what happened? What happened? I can't believe, I mean, he's already in the injury tent. And I asked him, like, what was that about? And he goes, yeah, that wasn't injury related. And if you know what also can happen in an injury tent other than being checked for an injury, well, then you know what the issue was there and what he needed to take care of, an emergency situation. So, yeah, not an injury related trip to the injury tent, which is good for Braelon. But the other thing that stood out to me was his comment about that 32-yard run, because he was asked about whether he thought the 6-yard run kind of got him going. He goes, I don't remember the 6-yard run. My head's all over the place, but the 32-yard run, yes. But he got up so quick and ran back to the huddle because he wanted to show Phil Longo that he wanted the ball again. And he said he did that every other carry he got because he said he wanted to show Phil Longo that, hey, give me the ball and give it to me every time you can, because I want that ball. I want this on my shoulders right now. And he showed out. He had ended up with 12 carries for 94 yards and those 2 touchdowns, finished with, I think, 99 total yards. It was a really impressive performance from him in the second half.
Statistically, it will not go down as his finest performance. He's had some really good ones his first years, but from the standpoint of what he was able to persevere through mentally and physically, this was as impressive as any of them. It is interesting, though. I mean, yeah, he's had the injury history, and he wants to be compared to these other great backs at Wisconsin, but there's a lot to get there. And like none of these other backs would have probably been in a situation where they felt they had to prove to the coaching staff that they should still be out there. But I think that's obviously the injury and what Chez has been able to do and what they want out of this offense. Like, this staff has to think long-term too. I mean, that's the other thing that's really hard here. And Bordolini mentioned this too. Like, yeah, he could probably carry 20 plus games in some of these games, but you want to have him down the stretch. And the last thing you want is he's gassed and you don't have one of your best players. So I think there's a lot of layers that go into this.
There is. The idea that he has to prove himself, I think maybe that is in his head. Then again, Fickle kind of said it last Monday, where guys have to compete every week for jobs. Like that's what we've done here. And if the room is good enough, and he's not talking about running backs necessarily, he's talking about every position. But if we've done what we are supposed to do here and create enough competition, well, then we're going to have an opportunity to be where things are not going to just be straight every single week. And we kind of saw that in the safety room, I think, this week with all the different guys that rolled through there. But you're going to compete for jobs on Tuesday and Wednesday. and it's not just going to be about your play on Saturday that determines whether you're going to be out there every week. That said, about Braelon, maybe he feels like he needs to prove himself because this is a new staff. This is not the staff that recruited him. This is not the staff that he chose to play for at Wisconsin. So maybe and I know they've built a relationship, but it's only been a relationship built on, less than 9 months, 10 months here. So I think it's maybe, and really only 2 games of action, if you're not counting the Georgia Southern game, that maybe he feels like he needs to prove that and needs to hear it from them that they believe in him enough to put him out there when he is not 100%.
I believe that. I think that is true. And that's okay. Obviously competitors use whatever they can as motivation and fuel, but I also think it's based in a little bit of reality here based on the touches, obviously, and the offense. And so I don't think it's the worst thing in the world that he feels like he has something to prove, or that maybe he needs the coaches to tell him that and remind him that if that gets him where he needs to be in the end.
Yeah. So the other aspect of the first half issues, we talked about the turnovers, which is a huge, huge thing for Wisconsin because they didn't have any turnovers in the first 2 games of the year, and they get 6, their most in a game since they had 7 against Northwestern in 2010. And so those are big numbers. It was also a very big number of passing yards, especially in the first half. I think Davis Brin threw for 251 yards in the first half. He had a 68-yard catch and run. Not sure exactly which receiver it was, but it's irrelevant. There were a lot of more big plays out of the opposing offense against the Wisconsin secondary.
I think it's got to be a major concern here moving forward. We knew that Brin was going to throw for a pretty decent amount of yards based on their offense, based on that he came in, I think it was 278 yards a game he was averaging through the first 2. And yeah, he threw 5 interceptions, a couple that were just absolute boneheaded, can't understand what it is that you're looking at. But those pass plays, if it makes you think, look, if they're going to be open against Georgia Southern, you saying they're not going to be open against Ohio State? And maybe it's not fair to use that as the consistently come back to that game. But
do you think they're going to be open against Purdue? Like, right. You don't need to go to Ohio State to say this. If they're open against Buffalo and they're open against Georgia Southern, they're going to be open against Purdue. They're going to be open against Rutgers. I don't know about Northwestern, but they're going to be open against, Big Ten teams.
Yeah. So I think it's a legitimate concern. And the hard thing, and I want to just lay this out because I feel like when readers read stories and the team doesn't perform up to the level that, when you're writing in the off season, you're only seeing the guys go up against themselves. And so you don't necessarily know exactly what it's going to look like in the season. I do think Ricardo Hallman was outstanding. And there were these other guys that had really good moments, but then you see him when the bullets are flying and there are some issues. And I think it's obviously something they've got to figure out. And it's notable that they've shuffled at least the safety rotations, but they also did it corner too, because Nazir Forkurian played a considerable number of snaps. He did in the first game. In the second game, Alexander Smith played all but like 6 of them. So they're trying to find the right pieces. And Austin Brown is somebody at safety who hadn't played at all in the first 2 games, played a ton in week 3. So it seems like Mike Tressel and the rest of the defensive staff is still trying to figure out who is best for certain situations. That's not a bad thing in non-conference play, but at a certain point, you've got to figure it out. And obviously you have to prevent those big plays.
Are you trying to say that you were wrong about this team?
No, I'm not trying to say I'm wrong. I am trying to say that a lot of people get upset and want to go somewhere to place blame. And it's like, I'm writing about what I'm seeing, right. But they're going against each other.
No, Jesse, it's your fault.
Yeah,
it's your fault.
You're right.
You built all these expectations up and now they're not living up to those expectations. And this is your fault. This has nothing to do with Ricardo Hallman getting beat on a double move. This has nothing to do with Jason Maitre getting called for pass interference. This has nothing to do with Kamoi Latu staring in the backfield and letting guys run by him. That is not the problem here. The problem is you.
Yeah.
The problem is you talked about these guys in the offseason like they were all Americans, and now they're not. You can only talk about what you see. You have no ability to see if that's actually going to turn out to be something great come September and October. So just stop getting in his mentions about it. All right. That said, I was wrong about this team. I was wrong about this team. I thought they were going to be much better than they've been to this point. Now, does that mean that they can't be the third quarter Badgers on a consistent basis? Absolutely not. I think they can be, but they are not anywhere close to the team that, could win a double-digit number of games right now. They're not playing like that team on a consistent basis to win a double-digit number of games, which you had them winning and I had them winning. They're not there. They're not. And I almost tweeted that yesterday when they were down 14-7. Glad I didn't, but I still feel that in me. Like they have the ability to win a double-digit number of games, but they are not playing well enough to feel good about that number.
I would say they're much farther away from where I thought they would be as well. I'm willing to give them the entire Big Ten season here to try and show what they can be, but it just shows, I think, in part how challenging it is to come in and implement something totally new. And like, yes, Phil Longo had success at other places, and I know he mentioned the whole Sam Houston thing, but this is different. It just is. And it is surprising in some sense based on some of the big plays we saw throughout practices, but it's definitely taking a lot longer than I and imagine other people anticipated as well.
I think we've talked a lot about negative things here today already. Would like to hit on a few positive things. I thought Tanner Mordecai, both throwing the ball and, really his ability to extend plays with his feet and then take off and run has been a huge weapon these last 2 weeks. We saw it in the Washington State game and the touchdown to Skylar Bell. But the 2 touchdown runs, one was not supposed to be him. The first one, Tanner Bortolini put that one a little bit high, and he grabbed it and went in. And Tanner was joking that, when he looked around, he saw Tanner still had the ball. He's like, something didn't go right because he's not supposed to have the ball. He is not supposed to have the ball right now. So something didn't go right. And it didn't. But he was calm enough to grab it and just follow where Ches Malusi should have gone. And then the second one is just a scramble play where he gets outside and he's able to use his athleticism. And I know there's a little bit of a, you don't want him always to be that aggressive and just be looking to duck out and go. But I think he's kind of married the two pretty well here so far, continuing to look down the field for guys, but also knowing when it's time to go, it's time to go.
I think he deserves a lot of credit for what he's been able to do here early and especially not panicking. We talked about all these awful starts. And he mentioned after the game on Saturday that as the quarterback, you have to understand that everyone's looking to you. And so he has tried to be as positive and reassuring as he could be. And you hear that from teammates as well. So there's something to be said for that steadiness. Now that goes back to being a 6-year quarterback who has 2 years of starting experience under his belt and who feels like he's seen it all at this point. But in terms of execution on the field, yeah, there were some of those early turnovers, the 2 picks in the opener that he didn't want, the 2 lost fumbles in week 2 that the Jack Nelson getting beaten considerably impacted Tanner's ability to hang on to the ball. But I think he's been very good early and has given them a lot of what they need. I know people would like to see more consistency and more big plays, but I've seen enough flashes to believe that it's possible more consistently, but obviously they're going to have to show it at some point.
For sure. I will also say they were good in the red zone. Really good in the red zone yesterday. They went in 5 times and they got 5 touchdowns. That was after, start to the season that was a little bit uneven. I mean, they've scored. They've been in the red zone 12 times and scored every time. But going into this game, they had just 4 touchdowns to 3 field goals, and now 5 straight touchdowns, or I should say 5 straight possessions in the red zone that ended with a touchdown. So that was certainly a positive. They also got 6 sacks. And I know that there are some questions in the Twitters asking about the inability of the defensive line to get pressure. 6 sacks is pretty good. I believe I saw the stat that they're the first Big Ten team this century to have 5 interceptions and 5 sacks in a single game, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. Again, I know there's a lot of focus on the negative, and I certainly understand that from people's point of view, because Georgia Southern is not a team that you expect to be down 14-7 in the third quarter, and that's fine. But there's at least worthwhile to point out some of these other things that did go well. Hayden Rucci, that to me was maybe Tanner Mordecai's best throw of the day, just an absolute bullet to Hayden Rucci on was a crosser, little slant route there from Rucci that he took for 45 yards, which is now the longest passing play by Wisconsin player this year, which of course we all knew was going to be Hayden Rucci, the obvious choice. I assume you had him in your betting pool about who's going to have the longest pass play this year. That probably won't end up being the longest pass play this year, but my goodness, he looked really good. And so you're getting receiving out of him. And then I saw Tucker Ashcraft on one of the first touchdowns. I think it was Braelon Allen's first touchdown, just washing down a guy and pancaking him, and then getting up and talking some trash afterwards. It was a good day, I think, for the tight ends. Even JT Seagreaves getting in there. They actually went 3 tight ends on a couple of their touchdown runs. So the tight ends getting some love here on the camp.
Well, they deserve it because it's been a rough couple of years for the tight ends. And we didn't know whether anybody was going to be available to play the position at the start of preseason practices. Yeah, I mean, Rucci, he has had that ability, caught the touchdown pass in the bowl game last year, and felt like he was going to get more chances this season. So that's big for him. Ashcraft, we've talked about it several times here in the preseason on the way he's come on strong. So it is good for them. And defensively, I think this is a really important performance for the group going into Big Ten play. All the focus coming into this week was, oh, you don't have any takeaways. It's been 2 games. It's the first time that's happened at Wisconsin since 2012, and they managed to get 6. I do think some of these numbers, they've got to be, you have to consider the fact that Georgia Southern threw the ball 50 times or whatever it ended up being, and that's going to contribute to the opportunity to have more pressures. And it's not a situation like Buffalo where they were intent on getting the ball out 2 seconds after the quarterback had the ball. It was a little bit different, but for a group that's still trying to find its identity, for a group that's trying to replace 2 of its top playmakers with Keanu Benton and Nick Herbig now in the pros, I think it's a clear step in the right direction. And I think Hunter Wohler deserves a special shout out here because he has had a phenomenal start to this season. Got 2 picks, was sensational.
You're killing me. You're killing me. I was just about to get to that because I was going to open our Twitter questions with it because people will be like, my God, you haven't talked about Hunter Wohler yet? You're how far into this podcast and you haven't mentioned the best player on defense yet? And
it's called a segue. Just giving you a perfect segue.
Right. So that's kind of where I wanted to open our Twitter questions with. It's from Alex. He says, is Hunter Wohler the best player on this team? Wow, is he fun to watch? He had 10 tackles. He had 2 interceptions, including a beautiful play on a deep ball to the left sideline towards the end zone and just came over and made a diving interception. Just a great play. Also had a sack. He has been everywhere these first 3 weeks. He has been their best player on defense. And if I'm answering this question, I kind of have to say yes to the overall team.
Yeah, I don't know that I necessarily disagree at this point because he's put it on film most consistently. It is hard to make comparisons between offense and defense because what they're doing is so different. And Tanner Mordecai's literally got the ball in his hands on every play. But in terms of sheer consistency and playmaking ability, he is at the top. He has been phenomenal. I think he's got 34 tackles now. And we also knew coming into this season that it felt like he was primed for a big year. Just even watching preseason practice, how he was involved in so many tackle opportunities, how if tackling a guy was legal or allowed in practice, I don't know how many people would have made it to the next play because he just looked so fast and physical. And the other thing is this dollar defense is perfectly suited for his skill set because he is such a versatile guy. And as we've said many times, he can play up in the box. He can drop back into the coverage. He can really do it all. And it's a reminder of sometimes when people are evaluated coming out of high school, it's not accurate, but with him, it absolutely was. He's the only 4-star safety from the state that Wisconsin has had in the online recruiting rankings era. You can count Braelon Allen if you want to, but he hasn't been a safety for quite a while. And Ohio State does not go after very many skill position guys from this state. It's usually linemen, but Ohio State wanted him badly. And it was 1A and 1B between those 2 schools. And man, Wisconsin, they got a good one in Hunter Wohler. And only now are people outside of Wisconsin really beginning to see how good he is because last year, this should have been what he was last year, but he got hurt in the opener.
I guess a good transition here. Jaron asks, are we playing the wrong defensive system for our current DBs? Feels like this defense needs the type of corners we're recruiting to succeed, not the ones that are currently on the roster.
I don't know. I'd love to ask Mike Tressel that question if we had the opportunity to talk to him about it. I don't know. I'm not willing to go that far at this stage.
Yeah, I think Luke Fickell was asked about it. I know Colton Bartholomew asked it talking about the man coverage that they're asking these guys to play and some of the things that teams are doing to take advantage of that, and whether they need to maybe go away from some of the heavy man coverage that they are playing at this time because teams are doing those rub routes. He also mentioned that teams are getting away with certain things that that maybe they haven't in past years. I certainly thought, I know you disagree with this, I certainly thought the Alex Smith one against Buffalo was physical and as much contact there as usually you're allowed to. And then there was one yesterday that the wide receiver just ran straight into the linebacker. It wasn't even he wasn't even trying to pretend that's exactly what he was doing. And there was no call, and it was just a little nice gain to the outside. Like that type of stuff, when you're playing man coverage, is going to be really, really tough. And if they're not going to call it, then it's extremely, extremely difficult to play defense that way. That said, like, yeah, the guys that they were recruiting, how tall is Ricardo Hallman? 5'11", maybe.
What is he listed at? 6 feet?
Yeah, he's probably I think he's listed at 5'11", so he's probably 5'10". Same thing with Alexander Smith. And Jason Maitre, definitely. They're all below and not as big as the corners that they recruited, that, the freshmen that they have on campus, certainly. Not all of them, some of them. Mm-hmm. Amari Snowden kind of tips the scales a little bit when you're
5'10",
doing averages and that type of stuff. So, yeah, I mean, that is the type of corners that they want are not necessarily physically these type of corners, and yet Ricardo Hallman played every single defensive snap yesterday. They clearly feel like he deserves to be out there and needs to be out there. And he's been in position, except for the one double move. He's been in position, and he hasn't always made the plays, which was a concern last year. But I think if the officiating and the officials are going to call a game a certain way, you have to adjust your defense. And we'll see if that's what Wisconsin wants to do. They don't play a ton of zone. There's a lot of man responsibility in this defense, and I don't know if it's about the DBs or the way that the game's being called, but certainly adjustments have to be made, wouldn't you say? I think the game's gonna be called that way.
Hallman's 5'10" based on me looking at his bio, but I think they have the personnel to succeed on the back end. I don't know if it's not as good as I thought the secondary would be based on what we saw, but the talent is there in my estimation. And I don't think Tressel's putting him in a bad position.
Yeah. Just staying on the secondary, I think a lot of us thought Kamoi Latu was going to be a lot better than he has been. Like, I
think that's got to be a part of this conversation.
Significantly better than he has been. You felt good about the five safeties that they had, right? With Hunter Wohler and Travion Blaylock and Kamoi Latu, and Preston Zachman showed up. Preston Zachman, depends who you want to talk to here. And then obviously with Austin Brown, you felt really good about those five, but it was really at the top when you have Wohler, Latu, and Blaylock, and for Latu, it just hasn't been great so far. Now, did he have as many issues this past week as previous weeks? No, but that to me has been a big shock.
I don't think anybody anticipated coming into the season that in the second quarter of game 2, he would be so ineffective that coaches would have to replace him and that he wouldn't start in week 3. So I mentioned this before, but 5 missed tackles in the opener. I mean, guys they don't even get 5 tackles in a game. So to have 5 missed tackles is saying something, but we'll see how he responds, obviously.
All right, we got some more here. CT Badger says, give an honest view of the progress of this team. The quarterback pressure on the D has improved, but the big plays and coverage must persist. Offensively, slow starts, inconsistent, too many 3-and-outs put pressure on the defense. I see little overall improvement. Overall, many times they continue to look disorganized.
This is really hard because it's so different from last year. I go back to... I think from a mindset standpoint, this team is a completely different place. And while that does not answer your question on the field, I do think it's notable though, that how many times last year did you have players saying it felt like guys quit? Like multiple times. Keanu Benton said it after the Washington State game. Everybody said it after the Illinois game, and anyone who watched it could see that. I think that is at least a good starting point from like a mental standpoint, but in terms of on-field execution, it hasn't been as consistent, but I think when it's been good offensively, it's been better than what we saw from quarterback play. But it's really hard because there's so much inconsistency right now. And while you can say that something has been good, there's also been something else that has been just as bad. And so I don't know. It's like, I think they're in a way better place than they were last year, but that doesn't mean that they're in position right now to be a dominant team, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Chris asks, based on the play calling so far this year, do you think the wide receiver transfers would be happy with their performances and how they are being used in this offense?
No. Well, Will Pauling will. Here's the thing. Every wide receiver, and you can talk to any wide receiver in the history of football. Well, let's go back to when they actually threw the ball. We'll say they want the ball more. And so nobody is going to think that they have gotten enough touches. But if you're asking specifically about the transfers, we're really talking about three guys here. And Pauling, I think, has been what we thought he would be in terms of one of the most, I mean, of the wide receivers, he's getting a lot of targets, obviously. And he's made some plays. Bryson Green has had his moments. I think you mentioned this last week. Someone asked, should he get double-digit targets a game? And I said, I highly doubt that will happen, but I would love to see it just because of his skill set. And then there's CJ Williams, who I think we can acknowledge has not gotten the targets that he would have wanted. But a lot of that has to do with the ascension of Bryson Green. Again, we're looking at a situation where CJ was the number one guy in the spring by the end of it, but Bryson wasn't healthy enough to participate. They play the same position. And on the other side, the staff likes Chimere Dike enough to believe that he deserves the bulk of the work. So CJ's got 4 catches for 25 yards. It's probably nowhere near what he wanted.
Bryson Green allegedly did not receive a single target yesterday.
Wasn't there an incomplete pass on like a 3rd and
I thought so.
that went to him?
Officially, the stats have him for 0 targets.
Well, either way, it's not enough, right?
It's 0 is about 10 too few. Even if it's 1, which, yes, there was that pass that Mordecai threw, and it was like a way outside, wasn't even close. I don't know if it was on 3rd down. I thought it was early. I thought it was on that drive that Allen kind of got rolling. But either way, it's irrelevant. The fact that he, was not barely targeted. CJ Williams got 2 targets, and he had 2 catches for 15 yards. Bell got 5 targets. DK got 5 targets. Will Pauling got 2 targets. He caught 1 pass. Like, to me, like, if they spread it around. I think there's no doubt about that they spread it around. But the guys that need to be involved with that offense on a more consistent basis, to me, in the past game at least, Will Pauling and Bryson Green. And again, maybe that's the way that Georgia Southern played it, and they weren't going to let those guys beat them. But the fact, whether it's 1 or 0 or 1 is not good enough for Bryson Green.
Yeah.
Agreed?
Yes. It's someone is not going to be happy when you've got this much, I guess I'd say, perceived talent that has to go out and prove it. We saw that with Keontez Lewis deciding to leave. And this is the thing, when you're going to give the ball to Ches Malusi and Braelon Allen, that means you're not giving the ball to all these wide receivers. It's a tough challenge. I think it's a good challenge, but Phil Longo obviously has a lot to consider and figure out, and who's hot, who should be your playmakers, and who should you go to consistently. But I think we can agree that Bryson Green has proven himself enough that he's a playmaker, and you need to figure out ways to get him the ball, just like you're trying to figure out ways to get Braelon Allen the ball.
Tony wonders what happened to the offensive lineman and running back saying that how easy it would be to run the ball with all these athletes on the outside. It looks far from easy to run the ball.
Valid point. It has been at times, just not consistently enough, but it's definitely been lighter boxes.
I don't know that anybody, and again, I haven't read absolutely everything, and I haven't absolutely heard everything, but I'm not sure I ever heard people said it would be easy to run the ball. I think it was going to be, we're just looking forward not to be seeing 8 and 9 man boxes. I think that was, to me, that was more the message, as opposed to this is going to be easy now. Now we're just going to run right through it. Now you can correct me if I'm wrong. I don't remember seeing people saying, oh, it's going to be easy. We're just going to roll right through them. It's not going to be. Now, maybe that's the way people talked and that's how people viewed it. But I don't know that the word easy was ever used.
I'm speculating on where this question is coming from, but I think part of it is in the way that even Braelon and Ches and everybody else compared this offense to North Carolina 2020, when there were two running backs that had 1,200 yards rushing and 50 pass receptions and put up these massive numbers. And it was like, we feel like we can do the same thing. I mean, I never heard anyone say it was going to be easy, but obviously through 3 games, the running game has not been as consistent as people would have wanted. And there were obviously great moments in week 3 against Georgia Southern, but it was virtually non-existent in week 2 against Washington State. And we knew it was going to be different. We knew this offense was going to look different. It is not your quintessential ground and pound and what you're going to rely on. On the other hand, you're sacrificing some of that to get what you're getting out of the passing game. And we've said Mordecai has largely been pretty good. So this is going to be a topic I imagine we're going to discuss all season, is how do you marry these two? But they're certainly looking for more consistency on the ground, because you get these plays where Riley Mahlman and Michael Furtney open up a nice hole for Braelon to come around the right side on that 32-yard run. But this is football. You want to say like, well, why can't you do that every play? If you did that every play, you'd be a record-setting team like no one's ever seen.
I don't think anybody's ever carried the ball 32 for yards per carry. I know Melvin Gordon was close. In 2014.
Career average of 7+.
They threw for 244 yards. They ran for 207. To me, that's some pretty good balance from them yesterday. Mm-hmm. If they were to do that in Big Ten play, I think you'd be pretty happy about it. Now, they didn't do it against a Big Ten team. They did it against Georgia Southern. So let's see if they can keep. I mean, that's the type of balance you'd love to see, though, right? You don't 314 yards is great in the opener, but the 180 yards passing, the 270 some odd yards passing last week against Washington State, it's great. But 90 yards rushing, they had some balance there on Saturday against Georgia Southern. A little bit more on this defensive performance from Wisconsin on Saturday. Nick put out a poll question in my mentions, wondering, was that a good defensive performance? What do you think? And
did anyone answer it?
Go. I did answer it, but I want you to answer it.
Else answer it. What's the sample size?
It's only like 20 people.
Okay. Well, they're the voice of the fan base. Was it a good defensive performance? On the whole, yes. There were some glaring issues in the
You're on your own there.
Defense, but you think most people would say no?
Well, I mean, 95% of people did say no.
Okay, well, Davis Brin threw for like 383 yards, but he had 5 interceptions, and Muma was able. Yes, Georgia Southern was committing mistakes, but Wisconsin was taking advantage of it. And so it's hard for me to say that a 6 turnover, 5-6 sack performance is a bad performance. They weren't perfect. They had issues with the pass defense. But again, how many points did Georgia Southern finish with? 14
points? Yes.
So there were bad moments and a terrible drive where Georgia Southern took a 14-7 lead, but I'm not going to say it was a bad performance.
All right. I think a lot of people look at all the yards, just 455 of them, yep, and 383 passing, and then see the 6 turnovers and be like, all right, well, now someone said in the mentions that they were conflicted. And I think it's okay to be conflicted, but I don't think it was like a great performance, because you can't count on, or you're not expecting it to be 0 turnovers in the first 2 games. Like, there's a ball's got to bounce your way. Against Washington State, they did not bounce their way whatsoever. I mean, the ball's like bouncing right back into Cam Ward's hands. We talked about it last week. Like, that type of luck or lack thereof is not going to consistently happen. And there were some of those things that happened yesterday where the ball bounced and it went their way. So is it realistic to throw for 6 turnovers a game? Absolutely not. Is it realistic to not have any turnovers every single game? No. So, like, you're not going to get 6 turnovers. And yet, if you're giving up that many yards, that's going to be a problem. And that, to me, is where things need to be fixed. Like, you can't count on the turnovers. You have to be able to count on holding teams down and not giving up explosive plays. And they gave up a healthy number of explosive plays of 15 or more yards in the passing game yesterday. And in the running game, while they held them to, what was it, 72 yards, I think it was. A lot of that I think it was actually 93 without the sack yardage. They had some success there too. And some explosive runs, according to the stat folks at Stat Broadcast. So I don't know if I'm going to call it a good performance. It's tough for me to sit there and say it's a good performance. Yes, you won. Yes, you created all those turnovers, but so many issues, and they were not good on third down. After holding Buffalo to 2 for 15, they have not been good the last 2 weeks. 9 for 17, Georgia Southern was this past week. So there's a lot of things that go into it. Tough for me.
Oh, I absolutely don't think it's a great performance. I certainly wasn't saying that, but if you're just asking me, was it a bad performance?
I was asking if it was a good performance. I'm not asking if it was a bad performance. I'm asking that's the question was that a good performance?
Oh, okay. Well, it could be better, but it could be worse. How about that?
All right.
There's enough issues, but I think
classic Jesse Temple hedge.
There's some encouraging signs. How about that?
All right. Badger Local says, entering Big Ten play, what's the outlook in terms of how the offense and defense is going to fare, and also in terms of wins and losses? Have we changed our minds here at all?
This is going to be a weekly question too. I've not changed my mind about the Big Ten West. I mean, yeah, it's going to be a road night game on a Friday at Purdue. Purdue just lost to Syracuse and is 1-2, lost to Fresno State. Like, only one team left is undefeated, Iowa. And Iowa's got to come to Wisconsin. I haven't been all that impressed with Minnesota. So I'm not going to say every fan base is going to say, oh, their team's got all these flaws and holes, and Wisconsin certainly does, but I don't think it's any more than a lot of these other teams.
Again, as I said earlier in the show, I feel like I was wrong about this team. And so I'm not as confident in their ability to win the West right now. I'm not overly confident in their ability to go down to Purdue, much less, they've won down there. They've beaten them 16 straight times, and yet you just don't know which Wisconsin's going to show up on a week-to-week basis or even a quarter-to-quarter basis. And that has been an issue these last few years too. The lack of consistency from week to week has plagued Wisconsin the last 2 years and is plaguing them again this year. So my confidence level is down. I wouldn't be shocked if they win the West. I would not be shocked if they finish, like they did last year, where they're 3-5 in conference, or they're 4-5 in the conference. Like that wouldn't shock me either, just because I don't necessarily, even based on their schedule, based on Illinois clearly being down, based on Northwestern clearly being down, Iowa coming here, and Ohio State coming here. Like there's a lot of things that factor in their favor, but I don't know. I have no clue whether they can actually show up on a week-to-week basis and be consistent.
This team is farther away from where I thought it would be, like I said, but I would be absolutely stunned if this team goes 4-5 in the Big Ten this year. I don't know. I'm looking at it more from none of these other teams in the West have impressed me. So, how can I sit here and say that they have a worse chance now when the West is just not good?
Because we knew the West wasn't going to be very good coming in.
But now I've seen how not good they are.
Most of these other teams are exactly who I thought they were.
Yeah.
Wisconsin's not the team that I thought it was at this point, consistently. And the hope, if you're a Wisconsin fan, is that the third quarter Badgers are who they truly can be on a consistent basis. And I just don't know if that's real. I don't know if it's realistic, but we'll see, because they've got 9 conference games to prove it. They've got a real opportunity. As I just said, I'm not impressed by the rest of the West. They have an opportunity to do it, but to actually go out and put it on the field and do it on a consistent basis is not something that I would feel overly confident going out and say, yep, this is going to happen. Are you sitting out there and saying, yes, this is going to happen? Is that how, are you being confident with this?
No, I'm not, but I don't, I think there's multiple layers here. They're not as good as I thought they were going to be. On the other hand, I'm not going to change my pick and say some other team is a significant favorite here in the West. I mean, even Iowa at 3-0, I can't say I've been overly impressed by, other than they've managed to win their 3 games, but they didn't have to go and play at Washington State. They beat Iowa State. Okay, good.
Beat Iowa State, who then lost to Ohio.
Right. So
did you see that game? You didn't see that game. There was a field goal that was called no good. That was clearly good. Like in the middle of the game at some point, it was clearly good. It was ruled no good. They lose 10-7. I don't know how that happens in college football, when especially with all the cameras that you have, that you can't. That's horrible. That is horrible. You lose by 3, even though you clearly made a field goal. It's a very, very bad look. And then you got Missouri hitting a 61-yarder, a walk-off 61-yarder. Field goal kickers, college kickers. What are you going to do? But this kind of goes to the Big Ten question. Our guy Vitaly Pisetsky says, "Are they ready for the Big Ten?"
No.
Don't have a choice to be, though.
What choice do they have? Look, the good news, I suppose, is they got a bye week after this. So whatever happens, they can regroup. I don't know. They're not playing at the level that I think anybody would have wanted with Wisconsin going into the Big Ten. But what choice do you have?
You don't have a choice. You got to go down north. You got to go down to West Lafayette on Friday night and play a Purdue squad that's 1-2 and probably a little desperate to find some winning on their belt or under their belt under a new coach, right? In Ryan Walter, coming from Illinois, who obviously knows Wisconsin quite well after what he did to them last year with the Illini. So, yeah, are they ready for the Big Ten? Probably not. And yet they kind of have to be, because it is Big Ten play. But the same could be said for every team. No one's been perfect so far. Maybe outside of Penn State, right? Maybe outside of Penn State's probably been the most impressive team to this point. And we'll see if that continues on. They get to welcome Iowa to Happy Valley this Saturday in what's going to be, I think Iowa's a 14-point underdog in that game. We'll get to our picks later this week on Temple and Heilprin. It was a 50-50 week for both of us. We both went 3-3.
Thank you, Colorado State, for covering.
Fudge Colorado State. I didn't even care. Like, once the game was close, I was like, whatever. But when they didn't go for it on fourth, I know you probably were not up watching this game in the middle of the night like I was. I'm a bit of a sicko. But, once they didn't, they had an opportunity to go for it on 4th and 2 around midfield. Had they gone for it, to make it, they win the game. Instead, they punt it. It's a 90. They downed it at the 2-yard line. And Shooter Sanders and company go 98 yards. So ho-hum 98-yard drive and eventually win in 2 OTs. To me, that just screams, stop being so don't be, what's the word? Don't be passive. Just go after it. Be aggressive. Get after it. And that's what I loved about Luke Fickell, what he did in the third quarter, going for it in his own territory. His offense had not done anything to give him any type of confidence that it was going to work, and he went for it and they got it. And obviously they didn't get to keep it, but they went for it. I love that type of aggressiveness, and I'd like to see it from coaches more often. It's just something, some guys are just so risk averse to it, but I also felt like he kind of had a feeling in the idea of his team of what it needed in that moment and went for it. And I thought it was a really gutsy call, and was one that was probably going to perhaps be the jump starter for him.
I don't disagree. One other thing on Purdue I wanted to mention, I think this may be obvious, but it's a far greater referendum on this program than what happened against Washington State. I know no one is thrilled with that result, but given the winning streak Wisconsin has, that this is one of those games you look at the schedule and you think should be chalked up as a W. You absolutely need this to show that you're making the kind of progress that you want. And if you don't win this game, it says an awful lot about what may happen the rest of the way, where I would feel much more aligned with your thought process that this team is quite capable of going 4-5 in the Big Ten if you lose to Purdue. So this is a really massive game, I think, obviously for year one under Luke Fickell, but I mean, maybe even bigger than I anticipated when the season began, just with where things have started here for the Badgers.
So there are a number of other Twitter questions that I have not gotten to that I'm going to get to on the show on Wednesday, because I think it kind of actually will feed into our conversation about Purdue. So if I didn't get to your question now, it's either because I didn't like it or it's because I'm going to get to it on the next show, because I think it's a little bit more Big Ten idea and what can happen here in the next 9 games. So Wisconsin will go to Purdue on Friday night, take on the Boilermakers, and look to get off to a 1-0 start in Big Ten play and make it 17 straight over Purdue, who has not beaten Wisconsin since Braelon Allen's been born. Like, Braelon Allen was not alive the last time Purdue beat the Badgers. I remember that game quite well. I was born. I was also quite drunk that day. 2003, game day was in town. It was the week after Wisconsin had upset Ohio State with Lee Evans, the Shaber to Evans long play. So, yeah, it was a fun day. They lost, got a field goal block. Not ideal. 2003, not a great season. 2004, pretty special. That's when this streak started, and I kind of wish it was 20 years because I'd love to talk about that game, but I was told I shouldn't talk about games from a long time ago, so I won't do that anymore. But Jesse, we'll catch up later this week. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Zach. Talk soon.
All right, there he is, Jesse Temple from The Athletic. You've been listening to The Camp.